I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. The White House says Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to recognize the independence of two rebel-held areas in eastern Ukraine and send in what he calls peacekeepers is an invasion. That sets the stage for strong sanctions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is considering breaking diplomatic ties with Russia, and Kyiv has called its ambassador in Moscow away from the country. But confusion over what exactly is happening in eastern Ukraine is threatening to hobble a Western response. With us today to discuss the developing story is Dr. Balkan Devlin, Senior Fellow and Transatlantic Program Lead at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Dr. Devlin, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me again.
Now, all eyes are on this developing situation in eastern Ukraine, Doctor. And considering that this is a fluid situation, what do we know so far about the most recent updates on what's happening on the ground?
So yesterday, as we all know, Putin put up this staged meeting with his Security Council, and then announced that they're recognizing the puppet regimes that are set up by the Russian proxy forces in areas that are under the Russian-controlled occupation in Donbass as independent republics. And they announced the so-called peacekeepers, which is basically invasion force, to be moving to those areas. The State Duma, the parliament, Russian parliament, gave the authority to Vladimir Putin to use Russian armed forces to be sent in these places. They not only recognize these so-called republics, but also signed a friendship agreement, which is sort of a euphemism for Russian occupation, legalizing in their perspective the Russian troop presence in the region. How and when they are moving and to where they are moving is still not clear. There's a lot of confusion going on, which is part of the fog of war, which you would expect, confusion and propaganda coming out of Russia in order to to put this confusion to sea. And as you pointed out, to prevent a more robust Western response. But so far, what we are seeing is the start of a Russian reinvasion of Ukraine under the pretext of these agreements between these puppet regimes and Russia.
Some very concerning developments, Dr. Devlin, but tell us a little bit more about the overall significance of Russia's move to recognize Ukraine's separatist regions.
First, it is a very clear violation of international law, a violation of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. It is a violation of UN Charter. It is basically a violation of all the norms and rules that we came to accept after the Second World War as the fundamental determinants of how states should behave in the international arena. So it is very significant when Russia claims that this is just another region that declared independence and we're recognizing it. What they're doing is clearly violating international law by invading Ukraine without any sort of even with the flimsiest of pretext. So it is a very concerning development, because it really brings back or sort of broke this norm, this taboo that after 1945, that the state boundaries should not be changed by using force. And this is what precisely is happening. And this should worry us all.
So how have world leaders responded to this, including the U.S. president?
Biden had a press conference today announcing a number of sanctions targeting both the Russian elite as well as the banks and financial institutions. Same goes for European Union, and the European leaders, including Boris Johnson and Olaf Scholz, are announcing a number of sanctions today. We'll see how far they will go. They all denounced the invasion. One of the most inspiring speeches was given today by the Kenyan representative in UN, basically calling Russia as an imperialist colonial power, highlighting the fact that Kenyan and other Africans know what colonialism is, and they recognize when they see it. So there is a strong reaction coming out. Not everyone is joining. We'll see what China and India and others would do. Syria already, Bashar Assad already recognized those republics, etc. So we will see the lining up of those who are favoring authoritarian regimes on the one hand and democracies on the other. And we will see hopefully further and stronger reactions going beyond what is being announced today, limited economic sanctions, but really targeting the core of Russian kleptocracy, the oligarchs and others, and their ability to continue to pursue this war of subversion against Ukraine and the West.
Another search using ground-penetrating radar has revealed 54 possible unmarked graves on 2 former residential school sites in eastern Saskatchewan. Kisiku's First Nation believes many images are children. The graves were discovered on the grounds of the Catholic Church-run St. Philip's and Fort Pelly residential schools on the First Nations land near Kamsack. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald suggested last week that Canada lower flags every time a recovery has been made in recognition of the horrors faced by children in residential schools. Well, joining us now to talk more on what else needs to be done is Dr. Winona Wheeler from the Fisher River Cree Nation. She is also an Associate Professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Wheeler, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you.
Some very heartbreaking discoveries in Saskatchewan, ma'am. What do we know so far about these 54 grave sites discovered at St. Philip's and Fort Pelly residential schools?
Well, we don't know a whole lot more because the ground is still frozen and there's like 3-4 feet of snow on the ground. So they can't do a whole lot more. But there's another 4 hectares of land that they believe might also have unidentified graves on it that they'll start to look at in the spring when the ground thaws up.
And what has been the provincial and federal response following this recent announcement last week?
Well, it was interesting because for the first time you had the Minister of Indian Affairs, you had the Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, and you had the Archbishop from the local Regina Diocese all at the announcement. And that's a first. And so that was pretty, a lot of people were, I would just say they were not empowered, they were relieved to see, these 3 authority bodies represented at this time. And in that they saw some hope that maybe there'd be more action taken.
And speaking of authority, I want to go back to Chief Archibald's comments in terms of lowering flags following further discovery of unmarked graves. What would such a move mean to First Nations communities across the country?
Well, basically it's a respectful show of shared mourning and commemoration. It's what we do as a nation when there's been trauma, when there's been loss of lives, and the loss of the lives of these little people has never been commemorated. They've never even had decent burials or being sent back home to their communities. So it's a show of solidarity in many ways, and so some people might think it's symbolic, but it means a little bit more than that.
And I guess one of the bigger questions here would be whether lowering the flag is enough to recognize the horrors of the residential school system.
No, it'll never be enough. I don't know if anything will ever be enough. There's still so much work that has to be done, that making sure that those little bodies make their way back home, for example, making sure the governments are going to be contributing to do DNA testing to make sure that they can identify who they are so they can be sent home to their home communities. There's a whole lot that needs to be done yet. And the reality is that Canadians are just becoming aware of these atrocities. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done educating the public and in this age of reconciliation, trying to find some ways to come together and to help people work through it. Yeah, there's a lot that needs to be done.
Indeed. And in terms of really helping our viewers understand the impact of residential schools, tell us a little bit more about residential schools and the long-term impact they have had on First Nation communities even now.
Well, the residential school system was put into place as part of the federal government's assimilationist policy. And that was their quote unquote Indian policy for over 100 years. That to make us disappear as Indigenous peoples by assimilating us into the Canadian mainstream. And the way they did that was basically beat the culture and the family connections and the social system out of the kids. And so, and I've had two generations of my family, well, three generations of my family, a couple of older cousins went to residential schools. And the first thing they do is they cut off all your hair, right? And then they put you through this process where you're not allowed to speak your language, where Christianity is imposed on you, and rigorous military like activities going on at the school, like you're all dressed in uniforms, and you got to think about the impact that 3 to 4 generations of people going to residential schools has on the community at large and on families. It's absolutely devastating. So you got 3 or 4 generations of people having it beaten into them, all of these dehumanizing assaults against their persons and against their people.
I wish I could talk more with you, but we are out of time, so we'll definitely have to bring you back on Forum Daily, ma'am. But thank you so much for joining us today. Ukraine is urging its citizens to leave Russia. Ukraine's lawmakers have approved a nationwide state of emergency beginning on Thursday as fears of a Russian invasion increase. Meanwhile, Moscow has started evacuating personnel from its embassy in Ukraine. Hopes for a diplomatic way out of the crisis appear all but sunk as Washington and key European allies accuse Moscow of crossing a red line. This for rolling over Ukraine's border into separatist regions. The situation remains fluid and uncertain, but one expert suggests that there may be a precedent to learn from. Jim Brooke, writing for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, says Russian action in Georgia in 2008 may be the blueprint for what is happening in Ukraine today. Mr. Brooke previously was Canadian bureau chief of the New York Times and senior positions that he has held with Bloomberg and Voice of America. He is currently a visiting fellow at the FDD, and he joins us now. Mr. Brooke, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima. I appreciate it.
Now, all eyes are on this developing situation, but you say we should look to the past and draw similarities from Russian moves in Georgia in 2008. So tell us a little bit more about what happened back then.
Right. The first week of August in 2008, I was in Tbilisi, Georgia, watching Russian TV, which you could get then, and I saw these hysterical TV correspondents reporting that civilians were being evacuated from the capital of South Ossetia. The civilians looked very relaxed. They looked like they were going to summer camp, and they probably were. But basically, the Russia propaganda machine was starting in action. It coincided with the end of military maneuvers just north of the Georgian border. At the end of those maneuvers, the Russians left 1,000 pieces of equipment, trucks, tanks, armored personnel carriers, right at the northern end of this tunnel through the mountains that goes down into Georgia. I don't know whether the CIA was asleep that weekend or what, but they didn't really get the message through. The sessions are backed by the Russians, started shelling in a very provocative way, killing about 15 Georgian police officers and soldiers. And then finally, the president of Georgia fell for the bait and attacked the secessionists, and then the Russians pounced. And we now know that back about 4 months earlier, they had already prepared a battle plan. And the trigger was the US decision, along with Canada and other countries in NATO, to invite Georgia and Ukraine to join NATO. And that set off the Russians immediately. They decided this is our time to act. And they did. So the whole thing was being made up. And at the same time, the Russian president accused the Georgians of genocide, of killing thousands of South Ossetians. In reality, 5 months after the war, the official Russian death toll was 168. So the Russian president said genocide. All the Russian reporters repeated that. And that created a very ugly situation, similar to the Balkans, where the locals supported the purging of Georgian villages, burning them out. It was very, very ugly.
Sounds very similar to the situation developing in Ukraine, sir. So what were the political and military results of Russia's actions against Georgia?
Well, in the case of Georgia, in the long run, you don't lose a war and stay in power. In the long run, the president of Georgia lost power, and Russia kind of got their way. They got a more compliant, more Russia-friendly Prime Minister Bidzina Ivanishvili. And I think that's what they would like in Ukraine. They would like to get a compliant pro-Russian president in power without going through elections, which they can't win.
Well, it seems that Western allies do not want this to happen, and we're seeing sanctions being pushed upon Russia by the U.S., by Canada. But what are the effects that these sanctions are likely going to have on Russia's moves?
Nima, the big surprise this week was Germany, where they have a new untested chancellor, Olaf Scholz. And seemingly out of the blue, he announced that he was stopping Nord Stream 2, which is a 1,000-kilometer Russia to Germany Baltic pipeline that runs along the bed of the Baltic Sea. And that was going to mainstream natural gas into Germany and turn Germany into the Northern European gas hub for Europe, and bypass Ukraine. And so Ukraine, which earns billions of dollars through shipping gas, would be out of the picture. A lot of pushback on that. Your prime minister, the American president, pushed back against that pipeline. But the German chancellor took measures that this thing is not supposed to happen.
Definitely. We'll have to keep our eyes on this developing situation as it unfolds. But Mr. Brooks, we are out of time. We'll definitely have to get you back on the show to talk more on this. Thank you again for today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
We'll be right back. The rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine have led to a full-scale invasion by land, air, and sea by Russian forces. Ukraine's president says Russia has embarked on a path of evil, but Ukraine is defending itself and won't give up its freedom. Russia is shelling and conducting airstrikes on cities and bases, and Ukraine's government says Russian tanks and troops rolled across the border in what it called a full-scale war. Ukrainians gathered in train stations and clogged highways as Russian forces advanced from the east, north, and south. Ukraine has reported that soldiers have been killed and wounded as the Russian military rolls over the border. Russia's defense ministry says its military has destroyed various Ukrainian military facilities, including air bases. With us now to unpack this unfolding situation is the Honorable Stockwell Day, consultant and former international trade minister. Mr. Day, welcome to Forum Daily.
Good to be with you, Nima.
Now, there has been quite a few indications of an imminent invasion since Monday after Mr. Putin recognized Ukraine's breakaway regions. So for our viewers, can you give us a quick recap of what happened since then leading to the attack today?
Well, as viewers probably know by this time, it's a full-on invasion. And I think some people, Nima, thought that really Putin just had his eyes on the eastern region, the Donbass region, where there's a high Russian population. But indeed, he has shown the whole world he wants it all. He wants Ukraine. He's out to take it. And the question now is there any stopping him? Where will he go next? I don't know. Obviously answers those questions, but this is the most dangerous time worldwide since 1945, the end of the Second World War, for sure.
A dangerous time indeed, Mr. Day. Now, Russia is saying that it's not going to target cities and that civilian populations are safe, but how true could that statement be? Give us an idea of the situation on the ground right now.
Sure. Well, they've already started some attacks on cities. They are hoping that the Ukrainian people and maybe the military will just fold. The Ukrainian military cannot stand up to what Russia is throwing at them. And that's for no lack of courage on the part of Ukrainian soldiers. So Putin will either encircle and hope that those cities basically surrender, or it will get to the much bloodier street by street, door to door type of fighting. But he's hoping just the sheer magnitude, the overwhelming force will cause the Ukrainian forces to collapse.
Now, even though the Ukrainian forces are at a bit of a disadvantage here, how has the government in Ukraine responded to all of this so far?
You know, you have to admire them. They're being brave, and it's not just words. They're willing to die, and this is all admirable. But we have to be realistic here. They do not have the capability, unhelped by other countries, they do not have the capability to stop Putin's war machine. And that's as simple as that.
And talking about other countries, we've heard of all these sanctions being imposed on Russia. Tell us a little bit more about NATO, the US, and Europe's response to this.
You know, Nima, I've been saying for some time, and I think even a while back on your show here, the sanctions are not going to work. First of all, President Putin waited too long to bring them in. If you're going to bring in sanctions, you have to do it earlier so that the population of the other country starts to feel those things. The latest they said is, well, you know, we'll just cut them off of all our semiconductors and high-tech equipment. Russia has an agreement with China. China will give Russia all the semiconductors they need. One of the biggest sanctions they could have hit them with is to close down the banking system. It's called the SWIFT system, which enables international banking. They still have yet to do that. I think they might. And to shut down Putin's personal financial system, which is huge, including his, $200 million yachts and everything else. They haven't done that. I think what has happened here, Mr. Putin has seen that the West we have cut off the ability to be able to create enough oil and gas to fight a war. We have made Europe completely dependent then on natural gas from Russia. And when he saw what happened in Afghanistan, the complete failure and debacle there, he is emboldened now. China is in the wings. This is a very dangerous moment. And some of it is because we have blundered, especially on energy policy. We've shut down pipelines in Canada and the US, which could right now be shipping very precious natural gas to Europe to help them get through the winter, just help them stay alive. They are completely dependent on Russia. And that's why you see, as we predicted, France and Germany going a little bit soft right now because they don't want their citizens to be without energy.
We'll have a lot more to talk about as the situation unfolds. Mr. Day, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks for your interest. Bye now.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always follow us on social media or visit our website. Take care, Canada. Have a great weekend.